And hello, welcome everybody. I'm going to share my screen. There it is. Can everybody see the screen? Perfect. So my presentation today is about open educational resources and how they're not just for students and what we have gone through a little journey at TRU. And I also put in a chat URL. If you wanted to visit what I'm going to be speaking to you about today, you can use that link. But before I start, my name is Marie Bartlett. I work at Thompson Rivers University, which is in Kamloops, BC, and I'm an instructional designer for open learning. I would like to do a land acknowledgement before I start. So Thompson Rivers University campuses are on the traditional lands of the Kamloops, the Secwepemc in Kamloops campus, and Tachoch, Williams Lake campus, both within Secwepemc Ulu, the traditional and unceded territory of the Secwepemc people. And so this resource that I put the URL into the chat, I just wanted to say a couple of words about how it started. So it was in May 2019. Colleagues, we were working on some faculty development workshops. So we were working at the Learning and Teaching Institute at TRU and open learning. So instructional designers, we teamed up and we had a week-long session for faculty that were interested in working on elements in their courses or working on redesigning their courses, different curriculum parts of them. And what we were, when we were planning this week-long event, I think that we had about 10 faculty members attend. So it was a nice group. We went from curriculum planning all the way through in the traditional way of design. We had a lot of handouts and resources that we had permission to use that were from other institutions. So after this week, we said, oh, wouldn't it be nice if we had something that would be, because all of those handouts and resources, they were lovely, but not always applicable to how we were doing things at the university where we were teaching and working. So we decided after this event that we were going to do a one-day facilitated writing sprint to create a couple of key documents that we wanted to really have from TRU. And we wanted to make those open so that if other people from other universities were, searching for something like that, but wanted to make tweaks to customize those documents for their own audience, they could. So we did this sprint and we realized, oh no, scope creep. Out of a couple of documents came this gigantic idea of this resource that was dynamic, interactive, people could bring things. It just went. So we have amazing colleague at Thompson Rivers University. Between the Teaching and Learning Center and Open Learning, we managed to get a lot of people on board and started to work on this switchback vision, I'm going to call it, of the larger resource. And we decided on WordPress. We decided to write a lot of content that then would be open. And we also decided that that site would also be a repository, which would then be used through further workshops. So not just the Course Redesign Institute, which we will be running again and again and using the site for that, but also for targeted workshops for specific activities or assessments that people could use online or on campus, depending on what's going on, because that's the world right now. It's a work in progress, so please bear that in mind. I wanted to acknowledge all the people that contributed to this resource, and there are more. So here are just some names. Those are colleagues that are professors, they're instructional designers, they're curriculum developers, they're graphic designers, librarians, just amazing group of people that worked on this. And so here it is. It's oops, I should actually go back just to say why cricket, because we were thinking about something catchy. So we like acronyms. Course renewal in a kit. So that's why that's why it's called Cricket. And then I find that education is more appetizing when it's playful. So I designed, or I drew those little crickets. Those are, and then worked with a graphic designer that made them really, really cute in the web format too. Some of them turn colors and they turn. So I know that this is really not important, but we do find them quite endearing. And we do have good feedback from faculty about them, because they're different colored crickets for different parts of the site. So if you go on the live site, you will see that those crickets rotate. So we have, we decided in light of that Course Redesign Institute to have 3 major portions for the content part of Cricket. So the part of Cricket that can be used by people during workshops, as they work with faculty to design curriculum. We did focus on online and face-to-face, because this resource is going to be used both. So we have a big section on learning outcomes. Learning activities is still very much under construction. And then we have assessments. How am I doing for time? Oh, good. Learning outcomes, we were during the institute, we were looking at institutional program course learning outcomes. And then if you want to go and dig into units, we have some information as well, or modules or lessons or whatever within the course shell, whatever your institution may call them, or if there is a standard. But we talk to the purpose and role of learning outcomes, how to compose them, and we talk about some of the major learning taxonomies in this section. And all of it, unless otherwise stated, is open. So if it is at all useful in any way, feel free to visit, grab, and at any time give us feedback too. The learning activities I mentioned is very much under construction still, and it's because that's how the idea of the repository came about. So our group, I was in that group, spent a lot of time about what that part is going to look like. We were thinking about pathways, and the search and contribute came from there, because we said, activities, they're just like little pieces. Wouldn't it be nice if people could share pieces, take pieces? It would all be open. Good idea. It was such a good idea that everybody in the assessments and the learning outcome group said that should just be for everything. If somebody has a really good learning outcome, if somebody has a really good assessment. So we backed that out of that particular section and put it, if you are looking at the live site, we put it as one of the tabs, so that it's for everything. It's for any kind of educational object, not just activities. But because we were working on those 2 pieces, we are a little bit behind on the content part because we went all interactive. The assessments, we were looking at the theoretical foundations, design considerations, practical approaches. So those are in this section, there are again resources that can be used during workshops. They're information for faculty that want to read more about it. I talked a little bit about academic integrity. That one is a touchy subject for us right now, and so we gave it much thought, and we were looking at it more from design kind of perspective than process. So the sharing of resources that this site has, this feature is very interesting. We have tried this at TRU a couple of times with a variety of projects. So this is an iteration. When we tried contributing resources and sharing resources, even open resources, it really is a question of categorizing the content. Here we decided that we are going to start with tagging before categories will start emerging, and maybe then we could shuffle. So people have a choice to contribute. Right now, we are not really promoting the site. We are going to have another Course Redesign Institute soon, which is going to be the first pilot of not only using the resources, but also in hoping to get some contributions, because those contributions, we will solicit them from the workshop. So people will have a choice to share after a workshop, or even during a workshop, or the event that the Center for Learning and Teaching or Learning Technology folk would do. There are question marks that give more information about the type of licensing. There are different type of Creative Commons licenses open with different permissions attached. So we made sure that we have explanations, and that's going to be talked about in the during the workshops too, because there are the particularities that need to be followed in order for that. Oh, another interesting thing about the contributions is there's going to be a process of vetting the submissions so that it's protected from content that may not be what the university would want to publish. So there's going to be a safeguard for that. What I'm super excited about is upcoming, we envision, now that we have Cricut, we want to have little Cricut makerspaces. Our library is going to have a makerspace. We're hoping to partner with them. We are planning our first makerspace workshop on online debates. I have been working with a professor during this pandemic on transferring her face-to-face sociology debates into an online environment. And we did a couple of runs with different groups of students, and we have a pretty good idea. So this makerspace is a workshop next month that we will have the first one, where faculty will be able to come into an online space right now, hopefully eventually into a physical one, or some kind of a combination, and they will be given templates, and they will be able in 2 hours to actually make a plan for online or on campus or a combination debates during that time. So just a doable activity in 2 hours. And then it would be contributed to Cricut as an activity. So hopefully if they choose to contribute, it would grow that repository. So that's what we are looking at next, finishing the content that is under construction in the Cricut so that we can use it for our workshops, and then flowing the work that's created in the workshops back into the space so that we can share, and not only within TRU, but as a group kind of worldwide, if other educators would find something useful, and making sure that if at all possible, we encourage people to choose licenses where people can change and adapt the content to their particular circumstances. That's it. Do you have any questions?
We still have 4 minutes, and then go ahead.
Perfect. Certainly. I'm catching my breath. Adnan, I see that you have your.
Yeah, you seem to hesitate a little bit. Thank you for the presentation. You seem to hesitate a little bit around the topic of academic integrity and that being a challenge. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yes. So that is a challenge, I think, that we share not only in online environments, but face-to-face environments. And with the pandemic and everybody going online, we have had not alone to TRU discussion about people being concerned about what students are doing, how they are working on their assignments, and how they are writing their final assessments. And we are a group of instructional designers, and I know that in the Center of Learning and Teaching, we have really been focusing on the students and their experience and how they're doing during this pandemic. So you have this, you're concerned about the integrity of the content, or of the instruction, of the educational experience, of the outcomes, and you're also concerned about the students. And so those two, it's a healthy discussion. Those two forces are in play. And so we are talking in our resource and outside in our workshops about making sure that we do everything in the design of the course and design of the assessment that would look after some of those concerns without stressing out the students even more. So whether it is making sure that you built into the course more opportunities for genuine conversation between the faculty member and the student, and making authentic activities where the student would work on something that is very specific to them, rather than having kind of generic quizzes. And yeah, so there are design consideration. And for the assessments, if you do have a, we encourage, if there are final assessments that are proctored, again, to have maybe different components, that some of them students would actually bring in case studies. There's so many different things, but yes, it's a conversation, and we you did notice that I hesitated. It is a difficult subject right now for everybody, I think.
Thank you.
Marie, there is a question here from Stephen Downs. Tell me about Cricut. Is it OSS?
Oh my goodness, Stephen, hello. And I remember you came to our presentation in Vancouver on Casey with that we did. It's similar. It's kind of, we're trying this repository stuff. I will have to get back to you about that, Steve, because I, as an instructional designer, have many shortfalls, and one of them is the technical part. So I'll get back to you on that. I'm sorry.
All right, Marie, thank you very much for the presentation. We're going to go to now Adnan Qayyum from Athabasca State, who is going to present the architecture of open education in the United States. And I will share my screen in this for his presentation. Can you see my screen?
Yes. Thank you so much, Ana Louise. I start by hesitating a little bit because we just came through a presentation with the keynote talking about how much we have too much American-based information here in Canada. And here I am doing this. But for context, next slide, please.
Okay.
What I'm going to talk about is what are the types of open education in the US, what are the different uses of the term open education, and what is the architecture of open education in the US? What does that mean? Next slide, please. This study is based upon a group of studies that are being done from the Center for Open Education Research out of Germany. And it's researching open education architecture in 8 countries: Australia, Canada, China, India, Germany, Spain, South Africa, and the United States. And it's, Terry Anderson and Olaf Zwicky-Richter organize how we do research into 3 different levels: the sort of frontline level of micro research, which is talking about teaching and learning and design, the really important everyday work of education, and the meso level of institutional trends, and then the macro level of what's happening more globally. And this kind of is located more at the meso and macro level, this kind of research that we were doing on open education architecture. Next slide, please. So one of the things we wanted to figure out is, what does open education mean? How has that been used historically in the US and in other places? And we actually based this uses of open education based on an article by Martin Weller and Erwin de Vries from Thompson Rivers University, among others, Katie Jordan, who talked about open education as being used in sort of 8 distinct ways over the decades. The first was this initiative of open education in schools in the 1960s in the UK and the US, which meant just kind of classrooms without where there were pods that people could actually go from place to place. And that ultimately didn't work out because of noise considerations and parents not being comfortable with this sort of approach to curriculum. The second use of open education was the kind of emergence of open and distance learning institutions. And if you can go to the next slide, please, it actually shows the timeline of this. So, and we see the development in the open education in schools in the 1970s. Distance and open learning movement was the next sort of use of open education. And that was the emergence of the Open University of the UK, Athabasca, Allama Iqbal University of Pakistan, several UNED in Spain. So the whole open education related to open universities, and also later at the secondary level as well. So that was the second major use of open education. Where it really got a lot more exposure and interest was with the development of e-learning and online education in the 1990s, after the development of the web. And then open access publishing became a really big trend. A lot of that was initiated in Canada, actually, and also used throughout the world. Open educational resources came into fruition soon after that in the late 90s. And a really important part of that was the whole idea of the Creative Commons copyright rules, which we'll talk about in a minute as well. Open practices is something which also increased substantially and came to the fore in the mid-2000s, along with use of social media for open connections, and then MOOCs, which started again in Canada, but has really been shifted around in important ways, in significant ways at least, in the United States and other places as well. Next slide, please. So some of the open education initiatives, which kind of make this more tangible, include the open universities that I mentioned throughout the world. The Open University of Catalonia was the first fully online institution in 1995 in Spain. Merlot was an initiative based out of California, still existing, still going strong, in 1997. And it was kind of a very substantial open educational resource initiative. Open access publishing initially took place with the Public Knowledge Project, based out of Vancouver initially. And it was, what was important about this is who does this and its relation to digitization. So it wasn't state actors necessarily, it was a lot of individual faculty members in universities who initiated a lot of these open education initiatives. And a lot of it is tied to digitization. Only the Open University wasn't initially tied to digitization, but the digital transformation of education becomes a really important part of the whole idea of open education. Open textbooks and the development of open access publishing, things like I wrote a lot of Athabasca. I'm a little biased talking about that. Again, it started by individual faculty members. MIT OpenCourseWare was an open education resource initiative which got very high profile because it was MIT leading it, and they got other high profile institutions to be involved. Creative Commons licensing in 2002. Lawrence Lessig and other academics who were very actively involved in helping make that possible. Now, this is where we get into more controversial areas of what open education means, but I'm going to go with this for a bit. The idea of YouTube and it being perhaps one of the largest platforms for education in the world currently. The Khan Academy, which is a nonprofit, sometimes talks of itself as an open educational resource, and I'll come to that as well. And then MOOCs at the University of Manitoba, as well as out in New Brunswick initially, and then taken to different directions in the early 2010s. Next slide, please. So the reason I go through that is because what's emerged is kind of two meanings of openness. Openness, as David Wiley talks about it, which is the rights of users to reuse, revise, remix, and redistribute the information. And that's kind of what a lot of people who are strong advocates of OER, open educational resources, really lean towards in terms of openness and think of as kind of the more pure form of open education. But another important meaning of openness has emerged with this transition that's taken place historically with the use of open education. Next slide, please. And that is, openness is referring to educational access. And it's access in four senses of the word. There's physical access to course content, instruction, assessment via different delivery methods. There's institutional access via open admissions and prioritizing non-traditional learners. And that's what the Open University movement was really strongly connected to when they talk about open education. There was temporal access, which is flexible studies, part-time studies, self-paced studies. And then there was financial access through substantially lower costs than other educational options. A lot of what's been used for the term openness more recently is connected to that last definition of openness. Next slide, please. So what we see then is a spectrum developing of openness. There's open data and open content, with things like OpenStax, Merlot. These are some of the American initiatives. And then all the way to the other side, where you get the freemium model of you get a certain amount of access to the open educational course or resource, and then there's a paywall. And then you have to pay for increased access, and it might be increased access to content or feedback or certification. And the important thing around this is that it develops a spectrum of what openness means. So you actually find organizations in the middle which aren't necessarily connected to David Wiley's original idea of openness with the 5 R's, but they do allow for access to their content for free. So they're talking about openness as financial access. Next slide, please. So what's happened then is, because of this pivot, the idea of openness has really moved towards a lot of companies are being involved, private companies are being involved with the idea of open. There's, for example, there are these boot camps which offer entire certified programs which say, we will offer you the entire program for free and you don't have to pay unless you get a job, right? So they're assuming the financial risk for students. That's a bigger deal in the US than in Canada, where in the US, there's a huge issue with a student loan debt. I think it's $1.7 trillion is owed by students for student loan debt. So this takes the financial risk off of the student, presumably, until they get work, and then they have to pay once they get work. So that's a different kind of idea. This education is open and available to you for free until you can afford it. This is kind of the premium wall idea, right? So there's finding different business models for MOOCs, like individual tutoring for a MOOC, formal certificates for participation. These are the paywalls you have to pay for, support courses, remedial courses, offering credit points. So they're kind of taking the idea of openness and monetizing it. Next slide, please. I mentioned this because I did a study with a colleague of mine where we looked at open and distance learning systems in 12 countries. And one of the things we saw is there's a real spectrum of who provides education, whether it's the public sector or the private sector or a mix. In Canada, we're a bit of an outlier. We tend to have one of the most strongly public systems of education of any of the countries that we looked at. A lot of countries actually have a very significant role for private companies in education, both as schools, but also as providers of resources, of supports, of tools, of training, etc. Next slide, please. So you see, for example, in a country like Brazil, all of the growth that's happened in open and distance education has been from the private sector. And you see if the middle line, the red line, all of that growth is all private sector. The bottom line is all public sector, right? Next slide, please. So the reason the architecture of the open education in the United States was interesting for us to look at is because what affects the involvement of different parties is what is the landscape for who makes educational decisions. And in the US, it's a highly decentralized model, as it is in Canada as well, but it's a highly decentralized model in the US where it's not just states and institutions, but also companies and markets who are making decisions around education. And because of that, you get a highly decentralized approach with a lot of collaboration, but not coordination, and an immense amount of private sector involvement in the idea of open education. So you get a lot of private sector initiatives around open education. Some may not consider this open education, but it is open education in the second meaning of the term of openness. Next slide, please. So what you have is a low regulation environment in the US. Canada is actually fairly low regulation as well, so you can have really interesting initiatives and experiments by designers and faculty members to very high regulation environments around what can be considered and used for open education in places like Brazil and India and China. Next slide, please. So one of the things I did want to do was I put this presentation together before the pandemic, and then the conference was delayed, but I wanted to update it a little bit around how open education, in particular OER, is being used. Thank you, Annalise. How it's being used during the pandemic. And what we've seen is, this is again in the US context, in-person teaching fell in fall 2020 from 96% to 14% compared to 2019. And the proportion of all online teaching went from 34% to 71%. The awareness of OER has jumped from up to 49% from 44%. And it continues to grow year over year. It was at 25% in 2015. but OER use has stayed pretty much the same. So it's moved up from 14% of academics were using it as their main course materials to 15% in 2020 from 2019. So there has been an increase in awareness of OERs, but not increase of use. And in the study that they looked at, they said the main rationale was because people were so concerned about the immense number of changes taking place in their courses that they didn't want to also change all of their content as well and course materials as well. Having said that, OER has grown year over year in terms of the main course materials from 5 to 15% during the pandemic, and from 15% to 22% in terms of supplemental materials from 2015 to fall 2020 during the pandemic. OER is mainly used for introductory courses, and those who do use OER are highly satisfied with the use of OER, even more so than non-OER textbooks, from 89 to 85%. Next slide, please. So kind of the takeaway is openness can work. There's been a lot of great success stories of openness, Creative Commons licensing, open textbooks initiatives. This is American-based, and so OpenStax out of Texas, and the California initiatives like Merlot. Open access journals have been getting a lot of traction and increasingly popular. So that's all very encouraging in terms of openness. Next slide, please. But openness can also lose. And I say that in the sense that there are a lot of purposefully shifting definitions of what openness means to make openness be about it doesn't really cost you financially, at least initially, but it's not any of the idea of openness as envisioned by perhaps some of the original MOOC founders and the idea of David Wiley and others around the reusability and Creative Commons licensing. And I say this because the internet itself was often advocated to be a very strong open platform. But in fact, the internet from the 1990s to the 2000s has changed to the 2020s, where really 5 companies dominate and have become synonymous with the web in America and 3 in China. And they dominate the vast majority of what the internet has become. And I think we can all identify who those 5 companies are pretty readily. Thank you, Anna-Louise. And so I'll just end by saying, as I was looking at this, during this whole time, Coursera, which has been one of the larger companies taking MOOCs on and changing the definition of what MOOCs means and openness means within MOOCs, launched its IPO about 2.5 weeks ago on NASDAQ. And currently we're at $7 billion, and it very much uses the premium model. So the freemium model, rather. So all of the way of saying that openness itself is being challenged in very important ways. I'm not sure we are immune from that here in Canada. So that's what I'll just end with that. Thanks so much, Anna-Louise.
Thank you so much. Right on time. I have your email there. If there are any questions, I'll ask people to put them on the chat for later on, because I will pass over to Stefan Kruger from Knowledge One, and he will be presenting Revamping Moodle Learning Experience to support a fully online master's program. So I'll hand it over to you, Stefan.
All right, thank you. I'll just get my presentation on screen. Okay. All right, thank you. So I will be talking about revamping the Moodle learning experience to support a fully online master's program. You can see that Knowledge One is in the top right-hand corner, just an explanation of what that is. So we are a company that is owned by Concordia University. And we do a variety of work, but a big portion of our work is focused on the academic. And so we provide support. Can't see the slide, sorry, thank you. All right.
Oh, there you go.
There we go. All right, thank you very much. So we provide, back to Concordia University, we help them develop all their fully online courses. So that's mostly undergraduate. So we have a team of course developers, instructional designers to work with faculty to build their courses, develop their course content. We bring it online, we manage the LMS, and then we support those courses once they're live. So historically, we've worked mostly in the undergraduate space, but a few years ago, I'm just making sure. Okay, we were asked to help Concordia develop their first fully online master's program. So it was an MA in music therapy. There were 8 courses. There was a thesis component to it. There was also a practicum component with a supervision component, so they had to meet one-on-one with faculty. So this was sort of a change in terms of it being master's level, in terms of it being a fully online program, as well as the design of that program was very social and very interactive. So we knew that we needed to innovate somewhat in terms of our approach to education. So as part of that, we created a dedicated Moodle instance. And in this Moodle instance, we only developed this single program in it, and we used it as an opportunity to innovate within the platform of Moodle itself, wanted to find its boundaries and make it a more, I guess, seamless and visually impressive experience, but also marry that with the kinds of design, pedagogical design that this program really required. So in approaching this design of the platform as well as the program, we had several student needs that we kept as sort of our goals. So one, we wanted to support this entire student journey. We wanted to design it as a program, not just as a series of courses. We wanted to help manage workload and help students manage their workload. These were very complex courses, and complexity online is even harder than in person in some ways. So we just wanted to really focus on how do we communicate and help students understand what to do, when to do it, and how to do it. And it was also mentioned that it was a much more social program. So how do we facilitate collaboration between students and between students and faculty? And lastly, how do we inspire excitement and earn trust? And I think the main thing around earning trust is that the content needs to be excellent, the learning experience needs to be excellent. But from a first impressions perspective, we also wanted to bring a bit of visual panache to it as well. So this presentation will really look at how we try to aim for these goals and bringing together both our tech team, our front and back end developers, our UX developers, as well as our instructional designers to focus on serving these needs. So we're going to look at 4 things: course UI navigation, social learning, how we integrated that, how we approached assignments, and also what we did with the program portal. So I'm mainly going to focus just on showing what we did. So there will be a lot of screenshots, and I'll move through them quickly for fair warning. So just a note about course UI navigation. So theme customization, it looks different, right? So here's a standard Moodle. We reskin it, and it kind of looks quite different as well. So that's just one screen, but you get a sense of the change that they underwent. Part of this also extended to the courses themselves. So the course layout, we worked on the UX and the UI for that. So here's a standard Moodle course. Here's what one of our courses looked like. The basic layout, you can see it has a tile-based layout. There are collapsible sections. The basic layout is the same, but we also wanted every course to be a little bit visually distinct. So every course had an accent color. This accent color was always tied into the accent colors in the lecture content itself. So here's a few slides of what we did from, this is what our lectures look like. So you can see that every course is a different color, whether it's orange or purple or green or yellow. We wanted to carry that thematic signifier from the lecture content into the UI itself. Next, but it wasn't just about sort of making it look different or look prettier. We wanted to also help students manage their workload, and a strategy for that was to focus on communicating to students what was relevant that week, right? And by chunking things into 13 chunks for 13 weeks, it helps students get a grasp of what they have to do and what they need to focus on at any given point in time. So the UI was part of that. As you can see, we modified Moodle so that they can view all their weeks and navigate between weeks. They can also view all their weeks in a tile layout. Once they go inside of a week, everything that they have to do that week is there, whether it's readings or the lesson content. Once they complete stuff, they get their check marks, they can collapse their sections. So far, this is basically just reskinning Moodle. But we also did do some back-end work as well. So the thing to look at here is down the left-hand side. We ended up modifying the navigation menu on the left-hand side so that when they're in the context of an individual week, the thing that they most need to do is sort of do the content that's in that week. So we modified the menu that sort of helped them go from one activity to the next. They get their check marks as they go. Yeah. So that's all I kind of want to show in terms of UI UX. It was kind of a quick demonstration. I want to look now at what we did in terms of social learning. There's a few aspects to this, but I'm going to focus on two. One is that we wanted to blend social learning into the flow of the lesson activities themselves. So here's a screenshot of one of our lessons. Week 8 inside this lesson section. So we have a mix of like lecture content. These are the screenshots that I'd shown before. It's narration with PowerPoints and videos. But we always try to intersperse that with a diverse set of activities, and most of those are social learning activities. Here we're leveraging Moodle's large directory of activity types. We used a lot of forums. We used polls and stuff to make it interactive. But in approaching these activities, we did encounter a limitation where we often found that the best tools in Moodle, we wanted to use the strongest tools. And in some cases, it ended up kind of, in translating the activity online, we sometimes were losing some of the intent. So we had this goal of, can we, as much as possible, conform the tech to the activity rather than the activity to the tech? And so one of the tools that we ended up relying really heavily on was the database component that's built in, but we modified it. Part of it was renaming it PeerShare. We did a lot of work to embed more user-centric or student-centric language into the platform. So rather than database, which was sort of meaningless to a student, we rename it to something friendly. But we made changes inside that component. So this component is typically used for students to share different types of content. So it can be audio, video, text, different types of things. And once they add that in, other students can see it. This is what it looks like normally. Not very intuitive, doesn't look very nice. So we did front-end work to say, make some global improvements to the platform, but we also created a wide range of activity templates to support different types of activities. So I'm gonna blur out any sort of student content anywhere in my presentation. But you can see here, it's kind of like a video debate tool. So students could pick a topic, post a video to argue for their point of view, and then they could view and respond to other students. Here's another one where students would pick a picture from a gallery. So the prof chose the pictures in the gallery. Students would pick a picture and then write a little description about it, choosing why they picked it and relating it to the course content. And then students could browse and read through other students' entries. Here's another activity where it's kind of like building a pros and cons list. If you can imagine an in-class activity where someone is at the front of the board, writing on a whiteboard, and students are throwing out ideas and someone is documenting that on a board. So rather than everyone adding their own individual piece of work in a card, the idea is that it's done anonymously, and instead everyone is contributing to sort of one shared learning object. And we also, in some cases, flipped it. So rather than using it as a tool for students, we use it as a tool for faculty. So here is a case where the prof wanted to be able to share links related to different topics and organize them by week. And rather than just sharing links, which just appears as a blue link, we used this tool and created a template that would, when the prof shared the link and wrote a description, it would generate a preview of the page, kind of in the style of sharing a link on Facebook, right? It generates a little preview of what they will see when they then go and follow that link. So this work in PeerShare, my colleague Nadine will actually be giving her own presentation later. Maybe Nadine, I think you're here. Just write it in the chat and maybe people can know when your session is if they want to see more about this tool. But we were able to extend the work that we had done just for this one program and apply it to different courses in the university as well. So another aspect of social learning is that there was supervision. So that needed to be done synchronously live over Zoom sessions. And so here's an example of how we integrated that into the platform. So for the courses that had the supervision within that week, we always had a section for that. The second component there, if they clicked on that, it actually had the time and the link to the Zoom event, so they could just sort of click and join the meeting very easily. But as part of this, and what was being done previously as when the program was in person, is that students needed to bring their own agenda. And the way that that was normally done is that they would write that down and then give it as a piece of paper to the prof at the beginning of the class, and the prof would use that to kind of structure and plan that supervision time. So online, we didn't want it to be a bunch of emails because these were in groups and prof would have to organize their emails and put them into groups, and it was a bit much. So instead what we did is we integrated this component where there was a shared agenda where students could just before, like up to 10 minutes before the event, go and just write a description of what they'd wanted to cover. And then from the prof side of it, almost everything is blurred out here, but from the prof side of it, they go and they see everyone's agenda items combined onto a single page that they can just sort of read through. So it's really about looking for ways that we could exploit the technology, either modify the technology or build new technology to solve the kinds of problems that we knew students were going to encounter, and make it as easily for students and faculty as possible, really reducing that cognitive load, allowing them to focus on their coursework and their communication with others, and much less about just navigating the platform and figuring out what they need to do next. I'm going to look at assignments. The goal here was to guide the students through complex assignments. So these were not just papers that they had to submit. There was a ton of variety in the types of assessments they were using. And so how do we make, my computer froze there for a moment. It seems like we're back okay. If we're not okay, just let me know.
Yeah,
so
we
wanted
can hear you
to,
again.
Okay, great. So we wanted to help students know, what do I have to do this week? So part of it was about inside each week, the bottom section always had this assignments and to-do section, which was like a checklist for all the to-dos they had to do that week related to their assignments. But that didn't necessarily help them understand what they had to do overall. They still needed to have the big picture in mind. They can't just do the course week by week. They need to plan ahead, right? So our solution for that was to work a bit more on improving how Moodle presents assignments. So we actually created our own plugin here that added an assignments button into the navigation menu. So there's a clear place to go where assignment information can be found. Their assignments are listed with a due date, a weight as well. But once they click into it, we would build these instructions inside of our plugin. So some of them are quite long, and this was a long one, right? So there's a long introduction explaining what it is. There's a step-by-step giving out some more details. We always had a grading and feedback section. Usually it had a marking guide like this, a rubric, so that students could know what, how they would get a good grade. So, and then a section, some assignments needed it, some others did not, on technical requirements or other tips that the prof wanted to answer. And so different assignments didn't always follow this exact structure, and we could reorder the sections. But by and large, we wanted to just make it very consistent in terms of where students need to go in order to find everything related to like the big picture of their assignment. I want to show just one example of how we tied this together in one specific assignment. So there were quite a number of assignments that were like this, where it was a group video presentation or seminar. So here's an example of how this would be run. In 1 week, students needed to select their preferred topics because there was a predetermined list. Based on their preference, the prof would put them into groups. So then in the following week, students would need to be told what group they're in. They would have a number of weeks to work together. And then in week 9, they needed to post their presentation. And then in weeks 9 to 11, they needed to view each other's presentations and respond to one another. So that was kind of the conceptual workflow. So to illustrate this concept, here's how this was integrated into the platform. Of course, we have the instructions themselves, which give that step, sort of the main 3 steps that they need to do. It outlines it in that step-by-step section. And then within the weeks, we reminded them as to what was important and embedded components that enabled it to make it easy. So for example, there's a component there where when they need to pick their topic, they click on that. They can choose their preferred topics. This particular component helps automate it actually to make it easy for the prof to then sort people into groups quickly. And then in the following week, they are shown who is in their group. And they can send them a message. And then week 9, the forum is there. They can post their video, and then there's a thread of conversations that people can respond to them. So that's sort of one example of how that worked. Last thing to look at, I'm at 15 minutes, so I'll take a couple of minutes here. So there's a program portal. So one of those first goals that we introduced is that we wanted to support the entire journey. It wasn't just about individual courses. It was about the experience overall. And that included designing the courses to fit together, but it also included how do we onboard students before they join the program? How do they prepare themselves practically, sort of emotionally? How do they prepare themselves for success? So this was the goal that we were working towards. Part of our solution here was to create a program type course. So Moodle doesn't have any sort of program functionality per se, but we created a class of course called a program. And we integrated that into the dashboard so that when students first log in, the thing that they see at the very top of their dashboard is an invitation to click on, follow the link into the program. So they can see that there is an announcements there. They can go into this, they can click on this, and it then brings them to a page that has some of these elements that help build community. So we have a community section at the top that has a program orientation section in there. They would be given access to this actually months in advance of even joining the program. Once they're accepted into the program, they're able to go in and go through the orientation and learn about the program. So we can see here that there is a mix of video and text resources that introduce them to the program, talk to them about how to succeed in the program, give them some suggestions, some action items on what they can do to get themselves ready. Sometimes there's a video format here. There are tech help pages as well if they need ongoing support or just general learning resources in the program resources section. In the community connection section, we kept it fairly minimal. There's not too much community stuff, but we do have a number of things. One of these is student gallery. So students can create, and these are fake students, can create little profile cards describing themselves, and students can actually see this and browse this before they join the program. They can also follow these profile cards, and there's a button to actually send that student a message. So it's a little bit of a first step to creating a little bit of relationship building and interaction between others. So that's really kind of what I wanted to say. The program is not, it's less than 1 year old. It's in its first term. So initial student feedback suggests that we hit some of our goals. They tell us it's polished and it's easy to follow. And easy to follow was the big one, because coming into this, we saw these were very complex courses, and that was sort of the main challenge that we saw for students. For ourselves, it's really deepen our knowledge of the Moodle platform, pushing the boundaries in terms of what it can do and how it can work. It's taught us a lot about how it works. And so it's been a great opportunity for us to explore ways that we can improve the experience for this program and then bring those benefits to students more broadly. And not just the tech. How do we combine improvements on the tech with improvements in terms of how we facilitate social work, group work, coordination online, when those are things that sometimes get left to the side with online learning, and we wanted to really invest in that for this program. So that's it. I'll take questions if we have time. I think we're done.
Yes, there are 2 questions there,
Yeah.
and a comment.
QM standards. I don't know what that is, actually, so I'm sorry. Do you want to define that, or does someone know? It's probably no, so. And yes, the violinist, yes, it's purely for demo purposes. I'm not a violinist myself, so good catch.